Hey there, I'm Mark. Welcome back into my studio. I've actually just walked back into the studio after being away for a couple of weeks, and so I'm kind of refreshed and ready to go and ready to start a new project here. And the new project is going to be something to do with both of my Voron printers. We've been talking about this V0 a lot here on the channel, on the playlist that you're watching right now actually, as we've been building it and tuning it up. And I've mentioned this a lot of times, but I'll mention it again here. The plan with this V0 is to print small parts with a lot of detail. So things for like the model kits that I build and some stuff like that. And to that end, I've actually slowed down this printer quite a bit from the stock settings already as I've worked on tuning it up for precision. And we've got a very small nozzle installed on it. It's just basically tuned for printing slowly and with a lot of detail and precision. And that's good. That's what I want to use this printer for. But as I've been away, I've been thinking about my other printer, my Voron 2.4. And what I want this one to be is kind of the opposite, right? I want to print large functional parts, big strong parts, you know, things like containers and storage solutions and tools and things like that to use here in the studio. And I already do that with this printer, but I would like to do it faster. And so whereas we've taken this printer and we've slowed it down on purpose, I would like to now speed this one up. And so in order to do that, I'm thinking that the main way, the easiest way probably to do that is going to be just to replace the stock stealth burner tool head that comes on this printer. I know that we've got a dragon burner over there that we built for the Voron V0, and I know that those are compatible with a 2.4, so that may be an option. I know there's a few other options as well, and I've been kind of reading and researching and trying to make a final decision on what print head I want to use here. And so that's not what this video is about, but if you have a suggestion or a recommendation for what you would replace this with if you were trying to make this 2.4 go faster, let me know down in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that, and I'll be doing that project probably in the next couple of weeks or so. But what I do know is that no matter what I replace this stealth burner with, this little round screen that I've got here on this version of this stealth burner is going to have to go because all it does is add weight, and it really hasn't been all that functional as I've been using it over the last 6 months or so. So what this is it's called a Nomi. This is actually version 2 of the Nomi. It's made by BIGTREETECH, and I installed this on here maybe 6 months or so ago. It's cool, it's a fun little toy, but it hasn't been too terribly useful for me, at least on this printer. And the reason is there's a touchscreen down here, right? So this thing shows status while you're printing, which is helpful and useful. But it also has a touchscreen interface, so you can do things like preheat the bed or heat the nozzle up to a certain temperature or things like that. And I don't think I've ever used the touchscreen functionality on this thing. I've only ever used it as a status readout while I'm printing. And so from that point of view, it hasn't really been all that useful here. And it's just sitting here on the print head adding extra weight. And so I'm going to remove this no matter what. And I'm thinking maybe there's another way to use it. And the other way to use it might be to set it up over here on our V0. Because I built this V0 with no screen, and I did that on purpose, thinking that I can just use the web interface either from my computer or from my phone when I need to do that. And it's been okay as far as that goes so far. I haven't been overly inconvenienced with having to pull out my phone from time to time and do some operation here, like preheat the printer or do things like that. And so it hasn't been terribly inconvenient, but I'm thinking that having this Nomi over there with its touchscreen capabilities might come in handy from time to time. And so my plan for today is to take the Nomi out of this stealth burner. The stealth burner will continue to work just fine without it, and so I can keep using this printer in the meantime without that thing in there. And then once I've got this removed from here, I'm going to look at a few different options for how we might want to mount it here on the V0. I know we could maybe put it down on the skirt. I think I've seen a mod where you can put it on the front of the Kirigami bed. And then I also have already printed this part because I think we might try this as well. This is a dragon burner faceplate that has this extra bit up top here, which we should be able to insert the Nomi into the back of. And so I'm not sure which of those options I'm going to go with just yet. I've got to do some test fitting and kind of play around with it and see what I like best. So we'll see how that goes, but that's the plan for today, is to take this thing out of here and move it over to that printer and then get it hooked up and configured and update our Klipper configuration over here and add all the macros and things that the Nomi needs to operate. And so we'll do that today in this video, and yeah, let's just get started. All right, so a little bit of time has passed. Let me get you caught up on where I am and what I'm thinking with regards to where to place this Nomi on the V0 printer. So if you're unfamiliar or if you're just curious, this is what the Nomi looks like once we've taken it out of the stealth burner on the Voron 2.4. And so it's just a simple round screen with a PCB on the back and then these two wired connections, right? So what it needs is power. So this little cable here plugs into this side right here, and all it is a ground wire and a 5-volt power. And that is the only physical connection that this thing needs to anything, is just to get its power, because it connects to Klipper on your printer via Wi-Fi. And so this is the Wi-Fi antenna. It plugs in right here, and it's got an adhesive backed thing. And so in the stealth burner, it was just kind of stuck on the back of the fan. In my testing so far with this thing out of the stealth burner, it doesn't need this Wi-Fi antenna. It connects to my Wi-Fi just fine without any need for an antenna. So once we get it in the new printer, I'm not sure if we're going to need this or not. We'll have to decide. And if we do, we can plug this in and try to run this to somewhere that makes sense and stick it down so that we have our Wi-Fi access all sorted out. So that's really all that this is. Now, I took the Dragon burner faceplate that I had printed and I tried to fit this thing in here. And what I didn't realize when I printed this is that this was for the Nomi version 1, which was a little bit smaller. So this does not fit in here. And probably a lot of the things that you might find if you look around online on printables.com or whatever are going to be for the V1 of the Nomi. And a few people have remixed things for the V2, but this is not gonna fit here. And so what I did, I'll show you this here real quick. This was that faceplate that I printed as a test there, and so that one's not going to work for us. I went looking around for other options, and so what we've got are this one here, which is the same sort of an idea. It fits over the top of the Dragon burner instead of completely replacing the faceplate. It's just this kind of top part here. And again, I can tell that this is made for the V1 of the Nomi if I look at some of the other photos here, because the V1 of the Nomi had this kind of metal heatsink thing on the back of it, whereas ours looks like this, right? So that's how you can tell the difference between the V1 and the V2 really easily in photos. And so this is not gonna work. I could potentially remix this one to make it fit a little bit easier. That would be easier to do than the full faceplate. But I don't really like the look of this. And the more I think about it, having the Nomi on the tool head is not probably the direction that I wanna go. And so I kept looking. I found this option here, which puts it on the little front bumper on the Kirigami bed instead. And that seems promising. Again, this was made for the version 1 of the Nomi. You can tell from the pictures here, because that's what that one looked like. There is a remixed version of this for the V2 of the Nomi, so that somebody's already done that work here for us. So we could potentially print this out and mount that here on the front of the Kirigami bed. I'm a little concerned about a couple things with that. One, I feel like getting the prints and getting the build plates on and off might be a little bit harder. This just kind of might get in the way a little bit more than I would like. And then also the heat of the bed, I'm concerned might affect the Nomi over time because it's sitting right there next to the heated bed. So I'm gonna pass on that option, but that is something that looks like it would work. Another side note here with this one too, it would be easy to get power to this thing because we've already got power running to that area underneath the bed to power the little LED that we have currently on the front of the bed. So we could just reappropriate that power and use it for the Nomi. So that would be an option there, but I don't think I'm gonna go with that. Instead, what I found is this. And so this is a replacement front skirt that has a mount for the Nomi on the front of it. Now, the problem with that one, and I've already gone ahead and printed out this piece here, and then this piece, which would hold the Nomi and just screws in. So there's some screw holes from the back, and this screws in like that. The problem is this one, again, is designed for the V1 of the Nomi. So if we look, this is definitely not going to fit in here. And so what I've already done is I took some measurements and I reprinted this with some kind of wet filament, so ignore the stringing here. We'll reprint this later if I decide to use this one. But all I did was I scaled this up by the right amount to try to make sure that this fits. And actually now if I pop this in here, It's a nice, good press fit. It kind of snaps in place, and it is, except for the stringing on the print, it is a very good fit. So this, I think, is our solution. Now, the problem is when I scaled this thing up, the screw holes now that line up with, to screw this into the back here, don't line up anymore. And also the depth of this Nomi is a little bit deeper. Like, so if I turn this sideways, you're looking at it straight on, you can see some of these things stick out from behind. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go in, this thing only came as STLs, so I don't have any, real 3D files, no step files or anything like that for this. So I've just been loading the STLs into Blender and adjusting them that way, which is a little bit tedious, but it works. And so I'm going to load this STL, this scaled version, back up, and I'm going to try to modify it so that it's a little bit deeper, so that it fills in the depth here, and it'll stick out a little bit more from this faceplate piece, but I think that's fine. And then I'm going to try to realign the holes so that they line up with this. So I don't have to print a new or design a new version of this. I'll just make a new version of this that perfectly meshes with it, and everything should be good. So that is my plan. I'm going to go off and do that, and then get these parts printed, and then we'll try to go ahead and install the Nomi on the front skirt of the printer once I get these parts done. Alright, so I'm back checking in again with a progress update. This is the printed, redesigned part for the border that's going to go around the outside of our Nomi here. We've already verified that the size is correct. What I ended up doing was redesigning these screw holes. I had to move them back toward the middle because I wanted them to be compatible with this mounting plate. I didn't want to have to redesign this one as well. And so it's a little bit weird because they kind of protrude over the area where this is going to fit down into, right? So I can't just drop this straight down in there. But I do believe that with a little bit of work, I can probably slide it down underneath like this, or maybe start it this way. Yeah. All right, so if you're watching this, that means that this was successful, because I wouldn't show it to you if it wasn't. And it also means that I will have released the STL for this part over on my printables.com account. But what we're going to have to do is probably use this prying tool that I use to build model kits, or to disassemble model kits, and use that to very gently try to pry this thing open so that we can slide the Nomi down behind this little tab right here. And so hopefully I can do this without breaking the Nomi and without breaking the plastic. We're very close. So yeah, if you want to print my version that's on printables and do this as well yourself, just be aware that fitting that into there is going to require just about as much work as you just saw me do there on video. So now that this is here, I can press this down nice and tight, and it does fit very nicely. I've got fingerprints all over the screen, but other than that, everything looks good. And so this looks like it's rotated such that it's going to be centered straight up and down, which is nice. And we have access to the screw holes, and I did make this whole thing deeper as well, so that we've covered up all of the extra protruding little connectors and such. Alright, so before we get too much further, I probably need to plug in power. So we'll do that here. Simple enough. Nice. And this little cutout for power was already there. I didn't actually change any of the cutouts, so there's a little reset button up here that you can still get to through there. You cannot get to the USB port, but you don't need that once you've got the Nomi configured. Really, that's all the USB port is for, or for updating firmware. So yeah, you'd have to take it out of this to get to that USB port if you wanted to do that. And we should be able to now feed these back through here. And then I need to decide what I want to do about the Wi-Fi antenna, right? Because I don't know that we even need it, but if we do need it, it would be nice to probably go ahead and plug it in now. So I'm just going to feed this wire up through the back of here. There we go. And we'll go ahead and plug the Wi-Fi antenna in as well. Again, maybe not needed, but there we go. All right, so with those two things in place, It'll sit here like this. That looks good. And I did, because I scaled this up, it became wider than where it matches up down here. So I tapered this back in so that this should still line up there, and that should look good. So now that we have that ready to go, I've gotten, these are two M3x12 screws, like this. They were extras from the LDO kit that I used to build the printer, and so they should work. They should be the length that we need. If I can get this one to feed up in there. There it goes. Okay, and lining this up with the screw holes is going to be a little bit difficult because it's like hard to see down in there to see where things go to line up. But it seems like that one has grabbed. Yes, it has. And so before I tighten it all the way down, I'm going to do the other screw as well. Make sure we can get that one lined up. That seems correct there. Yeah. So we're just threading into plastic here, so I need to be careful not to over tighten and strip these screws. Or strip the screw holes, I guess. But I do want it to be solidly on here. Alright, nice. Yeah, and then this Wi-Fi antenna, I'm probably going to end up just sticking it like right here on the back of the plastic. But we'll wait and see kind of how this falls out underneath the case of the printer before we actually fasten anything or secure anything into place. Okay, so my plan was to put this over on my build desk and show you guys the process of getting this all wired up. But it was just hard to do with the camera angles and such, so rather than subjecting you to that, I'll just show you how it ended up here. So I've got the two power wires here that came off of here. I cut the connectors off the ends of these, the DuPont connectors that we had that were hooked up to the Stealth burner and the other printer, and I've just spliced on some longer wires to be able to route them up to the back. So these are connected up to where the Raspberry Pi gets its 5-volt power back here in the back of the printer. It's not the cleanest solution in the world, but it should work just fine, and it's not getting in the way of anything down here. So that should be fine. And then the Wi-Fi antenna, I went ahead and just used the adhesive here to stick it to the underside of the casing on the outside of the power supply. Now, I think that should be fine. If that's a bad idea, somebody let me know in the comments and I'll move that to maybe the back of the plastic or something instead. But it does seem like it'll work okay, and I did actually power this up to make sure that it's connecting to the Wi-Fi, so everything should be good there. So I'm going to go ahead and button this thing up, screw the feet back on here, and put this cover back on the bottom, and then we will power this thing on and see what happens. Alright, so it's powering on. It does look like it's got power, and with the Voron logo showing up there, I think that means that it's also connected to Wi-Fi. It has not yet connected to the printer. So we've got this little message here that says it's waiting to connect to the printer, but that's because the Raspberry Pi is booting up. So Klipper's not running quite yet. So we should see in a second here that it gets all connected. And there it is. We've got our little face here. So I think that means that it's all connected and working. Yeah. And so the touchscreen's working. We can do things like preheat the nozzle and stuff. Now, we haven't yet installed any of the macros that it needs in our Klipper configuration. So I'm going to jump over to the computer and we'll do that, and then we'll come back and do some testing on how this thing works. Alright, so over on BIGTREETECH's Nomi GitHub repository, they have this sample Nomi config file that we can include in our Klipper configuration. And I guess for now I'm just going to copy the entire contents of it. I don't think that we need it all, but we'll go ahead and copy this like this, and then we can go and try to put it into our machine config. So what I'm going to do here is over on our web UI for a printer, I'm going to create a brand new file here just so I can keep things separate and call it Nomi config. And we'll go ahead and edit that file and paste all of those contents in that I copied from the GitHub repository. Now, it's always a good idea whenever you copy Klipper config from anywhere whether that be from my config that I share on GitHub or from anybody else's or from even a vendor like this, to make sure you understand what it's trying to do, because you don't want to just randomly put Klipper config into your setup. So what this is doing is creating this invisible macro that's just keeping some status variables that I think it's going to use to display different things on the screen. So it's just true false, whether it's currently homing, probing, quad gantry leveling, and so on. So that's no problem. It overrides the M109 and the M190 G-code commands, which are the wait for heat commands for both the nozzle and the bed. So that's probably fine, and all it's doing is setting those status variables, probably again so that it can show you that it's currently in the process of doing those things. It overrides the G28, which is the homing macro, and that we'll have to take a look at in a minute because I don't think that's going to work with our setup. And then it's got G-code macro overrides for bed mesh calibrate and quad gantry level and Z tilt as well. We don't have any of that on our printer, right? Because it's just a V0. So I'm going to remove all of those for sure. And now we need to figure out what to do with G28, because if I save this and I go back and we look at my homing setup, right? Because we're doing some overrides, some homing overrides for our sensorless homing, we have this homing override section here. And so the G28 that they override, we're going to get into a weird loop where we're trying to call this over and over if we do it the way that they have defined here in this Nomi config file. So I think that what I'm going to do, there's a cleaner way to do this, but for the moment, we're going to comment this out and copy these two values here, or these two lines here that set the homing value to true and then false. We're going to copy those into our homing override instead. So this I can clean up later on, and when you go, if you go look at the files that I have linked in the description of this video where I have my config files shared, there will be a cleaner way of having done this, but I just want to get this working for now. So we're going to do the quick way for now. So I'm going to go back over here to homing, and before we start homing, here in our G code, we are going to go ahead and put that there, and then we're going to put it again down here. And set it back to false. All right, so that should work okay for now. I'm going to save this. Now, the other thing we have to do for sure is include this Nomi config file that we created here in our main printer config, because it's not currently being looked at. And so somewhere up here, I need to do that include, and I'm thinking that I probably want to put it fairly high up because it's a hardware thing that's sort of part of our printer now. So I like those kind of things higher up in the list here so that the files that I include further down, like maybe this macros config, can potentially override things in there if they need to. And so with those changes, now we can go ahead and save and restart, and we should be good to go. All right, so everything restarted okay. I am going to give you guys a view of the printer itself over there on the workbench, and I'm going to play here in the web interface. So I'll tell you what I'm doing, and then we'll watch and see what the printer does in response. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the Home All button on the web interface right now. So we can see that it is starting to home, and the Nomi screen there is showing the little home icon, so that's cool. All right, it's done with the homing process. I'm going to heat up the nozzle. Let's say we will tell it to heat the extruder to, let's say, 220. We'll see what happens. Yeah, so the Nomi is now showing the status. So it's showing the current temp, which is right now 40, 44, 47, and so on, and then it's going up to the 220. So that looks good. While we wait for that to happen, I'm also going to tell it to heat the bed to 60. And we'll see what happens there. So now the bed is also heating. However, the status is still showing the nozzle heating. So we'll see what happens. Once it gets to the 220 target, I'm hoping that it switches over to show me that the bed heating is in progress as well. We'll see what happens. All right, so yeah, we got to the 220 on the nozzle, and now it's showing the bed heating process. So that seems good as well. I'm trying to think what else status-wise. Once we get started printing, it does show a little progress bar showing like the percentage of the print that's done so far. I won't show that here in this video because I don't have filament loaded in the printer, so it's going to be hard to do that. I'll go ahead and cool the machine down. And so then the other thing that we can do is we can always just touch the screen here, I think, yeah. And there's a few different options that happen. So I don't know if the camera's zoomed in enough for you to see this, but there's like a home button, so I can hit this home button here, and it says start home, and I can say yes. And so that does start the homing process as well. All right, and it's got buttons here for auto bed level and quad gantry level as well, which does not seem applicable to this printer. So I'm gonna have to see if there's settings in the configuration where you can turn those things off. I'm not sure. It shows the current status of the temperature for the bed and the nozzle, and I think I can probably, yeah, I can just dial up whatever value I want here. So that's interesting. There's also a preheat button here, and there's some preset like PLA, PETG, ABS, and so on. So that's interesting, and that sets both temperatures. So that's cool. All right, once that gets started, I guess there's no way to cancel out of that, so I'm going to go back over to the computer and stop it. All right, so we've got that page. There's some settings pages here, so you can change the color of the UI, which actually almost matches the dark red that I've got here already, so I kind of like it. There's some other options as well. So I'm going to look through these menus. If I find anything interesting, maybe I'll make a second video on the Nomi here with any configuration changes that I've done specifically for this V0. But it is working right now, and so that's pretty exciting. Yeah, so I guess that just about does it for our look at the Nomi here. These are all of the default screens that it provides. And again, if there's anything in the settings that is interesting or that I end up modifying or changing for my specific use case here with the V0, I'll mention that in a future video or maybe make a separate video on it, depending on how interesting that turns out to be. But for now, it can give print status, it can show us when our bed and nozzle are heating, and it can let me heat the bed and the nozzle here from the printer without having to go into the web UI. And so those things I think are going to be useful for me here. And just in conclusion, I would say again, I think I said this earlier in the video, but if you have one of these things or you're considering getting one, I would not put it on a stealth burner print head itself. It just adds weight, and it doesn't really, at least for me, wasn't really that useful, especially on a printer that already had a screen. But in this case, on this printer that didn't have a screen, I think it is useful, and it's probably best to have it down here on the skirt. Or I've actually seen some mods where people just put this, because it connects to your printer wirelessly, it doesn't have to be physically on the printer. So I've seen people put it on a desk or add a rechargeable battery to it so that it can be a little remote companion that you carry around with you that you can use to control your printer. So all of those things I think are much better use cases for the Nomi than actually putting it on the print head, which is I think what it was designed for. But anyway, I think I'm going to enjoy it here. I'm going to go ahead and get back to working on tuning up this printer so that we can have a video pretty soon in the future here talking about the slicer settings that I'm using and how I'm getting as much detail as I possibly can out of this thing. So that'll probably be the next video on this playlist. And again, I do plan to replace the print head on my Voron 2.4. So if you want to suggest what I should use, let me know down in the comments. And if you're interested in seeing that on video, I'm not sure if I'm planning to do that yet or not on video itself. But if you're interested in seeing that, let me know as well. I could definitely do a video on whatever print head that we end up deciding to put in that other printer. And so that'll do it for me for today. I hope that you have a good one, and I'll see you next time.